Evening, it's 7 o'clock, and I'd like to open the October 15th, 2020 school committee meeting. This meeting is being held virtually through Zoom. The town of Littleton began conducting remote participation / Zoom meetings pursuant to Governor Baker's emergency order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law on March 19th, 2020. Since that time, unanticipated legal concerns relating to the open meeting law have been brought to our attention by the town clerk. Those concerns were supported by the Attorney General's office and confirmed by town council. One concern is that the chat function allows a parallel text conversation to a board's public meeting. Chat is essentially running commentary that is occurring but is not moderated or followed by the chair. All participants and listeners may not be aware of comments being made because some meeting participants join by phone and do not see these conversations. Another concern is conversations between residents within the chat room, which are not incorporated into the public record. In response to these concerns, the towns will implement the following changes, which in no way prohibit any member of the public from participating in discussion and sharing information during a public meeting, and will ensure that all listeners and participants have equal access to this meeting. People that join the Zoom meeting are set so their microphones are muted. If you called in by phone, please use *6 to mute or unmute your phone. So that the meeting can occur in an orderly fashion, we ask the people who join keep their microphones on mute so background noises do not interfere with the meeting. If you wish to participate in the meeting, please use the raise your hand function available on Zoom, or if you called in by phone, dial *9, which will activate the raise your hand function. The meeting host will notify the chair of the raised hands, and the chair will determine whether and when to allow public comment. When called upon, participants should unmute and state their name and address. After speaking, we request that the participant return their microphone back to mute. All right, thank you. We're going to start with the consent agenda from October 1st, 2020, and oath to bills and payroll.
Make a motion to approve the consent agenda from October 1st, 2020, and oath to bills and payroll.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Is there any discussion on that? Hearing none, I'll remind everyone that all votes on Zoom are roll call votes. So I'll start with Matt.
Matt Hunt, yes.
Justin.
Justin McCarthy, yes.
Timolin.
Timolin Rossius, yes.
Brad.
Brad Austin, yes.
And Mike Fontanella votes yes as well. All right, next on our agenda, we have two sections in the meeting for input from interested citizens, one now and one at the end of the meeting. I also anticipate that there might be discussion on some of the elements that will be talked about tonight regarding the memorandum of understanding between the school committee and the LEA, as well as some discussion relative to the health metrics. So if people do raise their hand during those sections, we will certainly try to accommodate them. But this is one of the two specific instances on the agenda where we have time for input from interested citizens. If anyone would like to speak before the school committee, please use the raise your hand function, and our meeting mediator, Dorothy Malone, will get you in front of us. All right. Seeing none, Dorothy? Okay. All right, and we'll move on with the agenda. Next, we have recognition, National Merit Scholar commended students in the 2021 National Merit Scholarship Program. Dr. Harrington?
Yes, good evening, everyone. Pleased to announce again that we have a number of students at Littleton High School recognized by the National Merit Scholarship Corporation for their performance on the PSATs. Tonight, we're pleased to announce that seniors Katie Aslan, Megan DiLorenzo, Ellie Hood, Simon Hune, Sasha Pavlov, Jerry Soong, and Caitlin Yandick were named as commended students in the National Merit Scholarship Program. Commended students throughout the country are recognized for their outstanding performance on the PSAT and their exceptional academic promise. Littleton High School's commended students placed among the top 5% of more than 1.5 million students who took the PSAT. Congratulations to these seniors. Each of them will be recognized. I've already spoken with each student, given them a certificate in person, and they'll also be recognized with a letter that is, if they haven't received it, they'll receive it shortly in the mail. Congratulations.
All right. All right, thank you. Next, we have an update from Dr. Clenchey and Bastille on this current year, 2021 school calendar.
Thank you, Chairman Fontanella. We wanted to bring the calendar back because the first time we had the calendar approved, we had not finalized our dates for back to school nights and parent conferences. So the calendar in your package tonight has those dates finalized. School calendars require school committee approval. So, excuse me, at this time, I'm asking for a motion to approve the updated 2020-2021 calendar.
All right. All right. Questions or input from the school committee before we entertain a motion? All right. Seeing none, does anybody want to make that motion?
Make a motion
make
to
a
approve the
motion.
new 2020-2021 school calendar.
Second.
All right, Tim, if this was Jeopardy, you'd be behind the curve, but
Listen,
it's not. So
that's because
okay.
I keep myself muted. Matt does not.
I realized she was going to ask for a motion, so I had unclicked myself. Thank you.
All right, a motion's been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, I'll call for a roll call vote. Matt?
See? Matt Hunt, yes.
Justin?
Justin McCarthy, yes.
Timmerland?
Timlin Rossius, yes.
Brad?
Brad Austin, yes.
And Mike Fontanella votes yes as well. All right. All right. Next, we're going to have an update on the memorandum of understanding with the LEA. I'm happy to announce that we have agreed in principle and come to agreement on the memorandum of understanding or a memorandum of agreement regarding the 2020-2021 school year and the hybrid model and things. This will require a ratification vote from the LEA that should happen next week. And then we will vote it at our next meeting, but it is effectively done. I want to go over some of the bigger components of it that are going to affect people, and we feel that they should know about. There are agreements in the MOA for the provision of PPE for staff. There are also agreements on protocols regarding cleaning and disinfecting, agreements on the distancing between students and staff who are on site. Another item in there is that staff meetings and professional development will be conducted virtually whenever possible. We've come to agreement on the use and maintenance of our HVAC systems. There's also agreements in there and understandings on how the school day will be conducted, both for on-site and remote students, including the balance of synchronous and asynchronous instruction, adherence to the daily schedule, attendance recording, and things like that. Another feature of the MOA is that each teacher will work with their administrators to determine if teaching will be done on-site or off-site when that teacher's students are all remote learners. Teachers adhering to standards and effectiveness regarding teaching off-site will be offered the opportunity to do so. Teachers will be able to access their classroom even if their students are all remote learners, as long as the buildings can safely remain open for use. And then the last thing that we wanted to highlight and maybe have a discussion about is that we have agreed with the LEA that we will be in a fully remote teaching mode from November 30th, 2020, which is the Monday after Thanksgiving, until at least December 23rd, 2020, which is the beginning of the holiday break. We felt that the amount of travel and socializing that may occur during Thanksgiving warrants us taking a more conservative approach to having in-person instruction while we see how that time of year impacts the health metrics. We originally discussed doing 2 weeks after Thanksgiving and 2 weeks after the holiday break. When we looked at the calendar, we realized that if we did 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, there were only 7 days of instruction prior to the holiday break. So in working with the LEA during the negotiation, we decided and came to agreement that it would just be just as well to be fully remote for that entire time period. We also felt that rather than assume that we would be remote after the end of the holiday break, after Christmas and New Year, that we would wait and see what our experiences are as a town and a state after the Thanksgiving break. That would help inform our decision. We may decide that we want to be remote for a while longer, but we'll make that determination once we see how things are unfolding. There are other issues in the MOA that are addressed, but they are more, nuts and bolts type things that don't necessarily affect the students and families. So those were the big ones. Appreciate the amount of work that the LEA negotiating team put in, along with Dr. Clenchey, Matt Hunt, and I, and our council. We were meeting twice a week for quite a while to hash this out. It was a lot of work, but it was respectful and ultimately worthwhile. But we're glad that we got it done. At this point, I will ask if any school committee members have any input, questions, or comments, and then I'll ask Dr. Clenchey to comment, and then if we have any public input, we will open that up as well. Timlin, I see you raising your hand.
Yep. I just have a question for those kids that are high needs. Are they still going to be in school, or is it everyone is remote after?
Dr. Clenchey, you want to address that?
That's a good question, Timlin. We're going to have to look at the health metrics at that time, and really, as a school committee and administration, define why we're taking this time off. If it's solely for the purpose to prevent transmission of COVID-19 because of traveling, one has to ask themselves whether it would be appropriate to bring staff and students in. So those are the things we're going to have to determine, and it's difficult to do that until we're really close to that date, and our metrics will certainly play a role in our decision.
All right.
And I'll also say that type of thing was considered during the negotiation, and not just relative to the break between Thanksgiving and the holiday break. It was also discussed in relation to the remote Wednesdays. It was also discussed in terms of on days when students who have more needs, who are in the hybrid model, would they be 4-day-a-week students? So all that was getting worked out, and the consensus between the LEA and the school committee negotiators at the time was that, as Dr. Clenchey indicated, that we are very sensitive to being able to provide as much service as we can to those students, but that we need to continue to see how things are working out. We're still only, are we in our 5th week, I think, of in-person instruction. So we're still trying to see how all that plays out. And if we can get more aggressive about delivering those services in person, the LEA was certainly amenable to that. But we both sides felt that we just needed to continue to evaluate the circumstances to see when that would be or not be appropriate, as the case might be.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, Justin?
Kindergarten's operating on a slightly different schedule, and then preschool, of course, is a tuition-based enrollment. So how's that are they going remote as well?
At this point in time, that's something that we're entertaining, but we would handle it the same way as the 4-day students, and take a look at the metrics, take a look at the landscape in general, close to when we're starting the remote learning process. I mean, really, travel may be somewhat limited by that time. There are not many states that don't have the red color anymore. So that would certainly be a factor that we would take a look at as well.
Okay. So does the memorandum of understanding leave it open as we approach these dates? If our metrics indicate that it's safe to be in the building with a reduced capacity, that we're going to have the high-risk students there, and we potentially could have our tuition-based preschool students, or will the staff and teachers simply say, we both signed this and we're remote? Mike?
Yeah, I mean, the discussion that we had during the negotiation wasn't that specific. Again, it was the idea that the buildings would be open. For instance, there's no assumption that the teachers wouldn't be coming to the building anyway if they chose to. And actually, I'm sorry about that. I skipped over that in the MOA. that was also negotiated that if teachers are teaching all remote students at any point during the year, there are some teachers at Shaker Lane and Russell Street that are assigned to fully remote classrooms. So they have the potential to teach off-site versus on-site. There are parameters around that in terms of, I think maybe I did mention an effectiveness and stuff, but it's the same thing regarding would we have students, whether it's kindergartners or high need students or the pre-K in the building, is going to be determined in much the same manner that we would determine whether or not we would allow teachers to use the buildings to teach, even if they were teaching all remote students. It'll be predicated on the health metrics and how we felt as a district about having the buildings open and to what extent. But the question about whether or not it's solely up to the teachers, no, it's not solely up to the teachers. It is an administrative and school committee decision about how we want to work through that.
Okay.
Our preference would be, excuse me, to continue on with as much in person as possible with those grades. By the way, pre-K is considered high needs, so it would fall into that high needs category. But the MOA certainly doesn't prevent us from moving forward if the conditions are right to offer.
The other thing to keep in mind is that one of the benefits that we thought about this, and we realized that this is not going to be universally applauded. This will have an impact on quite a few families in terms of their ability to conduct their day-to-day life. However, we felt that there could be significant benefits to trying to constrict the spread of the virus at that particular time of year. We also felt that it would be an opportunity for us to evaluate the fully remote model, or as close to fully remote, much closer to a fully remote model than we're currently in, obviously, so that if we are required to go into it at different times of the year, we will have a baseline to assess what worked, what didn't work, what we can improve on, what we know is fine the way it is in terms of delivering remote instruction to a fuller student body. So that's going to weigh into it too. Is do we want to try to get as much advantage out of that as we can?
Okay. So will we just, along those lines of notifying everyone, will we get a letter out tomorrow, district wide, even though it's not official, but it's official at this point?
Yeah, we'll definitely, get out as, the communication as soon as possible and then follow up with more detail, even if we have to be somewhat general initially. And then as we get more details ironed out as we get closer, we'll certainly, do what we always do, which is stay in communication with our families.
Great. Thanks.
All right, Brad?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Mike and Matt for our negotiating team for the school committee, for the amount of work you put in and the fact you shielded the rest of us from a lot of it. This was, for those of you who weren't part of the process, they really did negotiate and then report back to us when appropriate, but it was kept everything really tight to the vest, and I appreciated that. I also want to thank our partners at the LEA and the administrators for helping us do this. We're all trying to do the right thing. These are unusual times. It's an unusual contract. It's hard to anticipate everything, but I really appreciate the hard work y'all put in. The other thing I just wanted to add was speaking to the kind of the period right after Thanksgiving. It may have been implicit what you said, Mike, but I don't know if we said explicitly. One of the reasons we're doing this is because, as we'll see, I think later when Katrina talks with us, is the importance of having accurate data as we can. And our anticipation as the states are read, Dr. Clinchie, that not everyone follows the rules. We see this at the local level, we see this at a statewide level. And our fear was, and I think the LEA's fear was that we'd be flying blind for at least 2 weeks until the public health data reflect what happened over the Thanksgiving break. And we didn't want to put our students and our staff in jeopardy when we just couldn't have accurate data. And so that's one of the reasons I think we all negotiated that time of full remote. So maybe that didn't need to be said, but I thought it might be worth saying it more explicitly. Thanks, guys.
All right. Dr. Clinchie, any thoughts or input on the MOA?
I'd just like to echo what you have said and Brad. I mean, we certainly had a significant number of meetings, but negotiations were cordial and professional, and we were all trying to accomplish a common outcome, and that was to ensure that we supported our students in a learning environment that would be optimal to accomplish what every student needs.
All right. At this point, if there's any public input regarding the MOA,
We don't have any raised hands. Chairman Fontanella?
okay. All right, and we will continue to move through the agenda. Next, we have a presentation on the current year enrollment. Dr. Clencher, do you want to kick that off and
Sure.
walk us through
Dorothy,
that?
could you put the first slide up, please?
Mhm.
The first slide really was designed to take a look at an enrollment change from last year to this year. And it just disappeared. Now it's appeared again. Our enrollment is down from last year, certainly a trend that we're seeing across the state. We tried to tease out the differences to give you an idea of what's happening in our district. So our current enrollment is at 1,568 students. And when we take a look at a couple of demographics here, we have 84 school choice students this year. Our school choice numbers are really holding well. We're down, I think, about 3, but
Dr. Clencher, I've let her up for 1 second. I'm sorry. Dorothy, I'm really old. I can't see this. Can you make that larger?
Yes, we're trying.
All right. Sorry. All right. Sorry to interrupt. Thank you.
Okay, there you go.
well, that's much better. Thank you. So as we go down the page, we have students in our district that attend out-of-district placements. This year we have 29. For the last 4 or 5 years, we've had anywhere from 37 to 41. We've made an effort to work with our parent families and try to provide programming that would meet their students' needs. We've been very successful at that. So we're very proud of what we've done over time, and we're hoping to continue with that trend as we move forward. We have, some people call it Voc Tech program. It's really, the modern term is a transitional program for students that are post-grade 12, but are transitioning into community jobs, et cetera. We have 4 students in that program. That is incorporated in the 1568 total number of students. This year, we have 25 additional homeschool students than we did last year, again, attributed to the COVID-19 pandemic. As we go down the chart, we have 30 less pre-K students from the previous year. As I've already mentioned, 3 less school choice students. 12 of our students within our district left to attend private schools. 9 are attending Parker Charter School. That happens from in between grades 6 and 7. 12 students are attending Schcmte Tech, and that happens between grade 9 and 10. 2 students left to enroll in virtual academies. 7 students followed their parents to other school districts for the year. 8 students moved out of district relocations. As I already mentioned, we had 25 additional homeschool students. April 1st, 2020, our enrollment was 1,671 students with the closeout date that we used of September 16th. We've already said we have 1568, so we're down 103 students. The factors that contributed to this, as you've seen in the table, are kind of multifaceted. I mean, we did have some students that their parents chose homeschooling because of COVID-19. Some students went to private schools, parochial schools, etc. We're hoping that when we're through the end of the tunnel and we see the light and COVID-19 is under control, that we'll get a number of students back. But I think it's important for you to also realize that 61 of those students were from Shaker Lane, and there's a couple of factors that attributed to that. We have smaller grades in kindergarten and grade 2, and that's just the number of students that are coming through our district. So those both in grades K and 2 totaled 29 students, so that was half of the 61 student loss at Shaker Lane. So I mean, to a large part, 61 students in terms of the 103 decrease was attributed to Shaker Lane School. Opportunity to have those students come back next year is high. We're looking at preschool, kindergarten, and that in itself, I feel very confident that these students will be coming back to our system. It's not uncommon for ebbs and flows and enrollments in specific grades. It's kind of interesting. It doesn't matter what district you're in, you see those patterns. And our high school right now is in a lower pattern in terms of number of students in each grade. And in our middle school, we have fairly large grades. So starting next year, they're going to be starting high school. So the enrollment will go up in the high school again. And I think I've pretty well covered all the pertinent data in that table. Are there any questions?
Sorry. Yeah, Brad, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is really interesting, and I appreciate you sharing it in such detail. Again, I'm new to this, so this may be a fairly basic question. But if we have a 6%, roughly 6% drop in our student population, is it expected that we'd also have a 6%-ish drop in appropriations from the state? Is our appropriation school student based? And can you also address the kind of benefit to the district from having out of district students placed in Littleton? I assume there's a financial benefit to us taking those students in. Is that correct?
That is correct, and it does counterbalance our enrollment decline. Like most communities, our enrollment is not growing significantly. We anticipated a bit of a decrease in enrollment despite COVID-19, because our numbers coming into Shaker Lane School are actually going down a bit, so that does affect enrollment. We had some larger classes in the high school graduating, and with a significant number of school choice students, and it's virtually impossible to replace all of those students coming into kindergarten. Although this year our kindergarten class topped out at 114, we're usually in the mid 120s to 130. In fact, we've had as high as 137 in kindergarten in the last 5 years. So all those factors, attribute to what's happening in terms of funding. Brad, we're hoping that they're going to employ something called a home harmless clause, which they have done in the past, but we don't know at this point in time. There could be some loss of revenue. Pretty hard to determine what that is, but again, we've heard nothing at this point in time that they're not going to employ a hold harmless clause, and that's what we're hoping for.
So would that be in effect hoping for level funding and not, or just not penalizing for dropping 100 something students?
Right.
Okay.
We would hope that Chapter 70 would remain level funding. We've actually budgeted that way for many years, and every now and again we get a bit of a surprise, and we get not much, around $30,000 extra, 20,000 extra. So we're pretty close from year to year.
Well, thank you. That was very helpful. Just one more observation. One conversation we've had in town a lot is about some people have concerns about how our growth in housing stock might end up stressing the schools. It's not a good thing, but this is an indication that right now we can handle the housing stock and the new families coming in, and should be able to offer them a good education. So thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Anybody else?
All right, the next slide, Dorothy.
Actually, I'm sorry. I do have a couple quick comments. Sorry, I was scanning the screen to make sure I wasn't stepping on anybody's toes. I just want to make sure we put a little context on here. So, we're down a little over 100 students from last year, but you had 9 students that opted for Parker and 12 students that opted for technical schools. It's highly likely those students were going to opt for those schools anyway.
Mhm.
And then we had another 12 students who opted for private or parochial schools. And it's possible that a few of them did it specifically in respect to the COVID, because I know that some private schools and parochial schools are doing more in-person instruction than is typically being offered by public schools. So we may see some of those kids come back, but we're down around, Brad said 6%. I did the math and came up with 7%. But I'm not gonna pick about that. But if we, if those kids that went out to Parker and the Tech, we assume are not coming back. But if we assume that about 65 of the kids came back, because 25 homeschooled kids, it's highly likely that they opted that for 1 year just because of the circumstances, then our reduction would be closer to 3%, which is not really that much on a year-by-year basis. It fluctuates every year up or down. So at this point, I don't think it's all that dramatic or concerning. And then the other thing I wanted to say was in respect to Brad's question about a potential impact on funding, is that, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Clenchey, but this is somewhat of a statewide phenomenon. A lot of districts, if not all districts, are seeing some reduction in enrollment as parents decide that maybe their options, at least for this year, are better through homeschooling or other options than it would be to send their kids into a hybrid or remote model.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that was predicted as soon as we determined that we weren't going to be able to come back fully in person. So it certainly isn't a surprise to educational leaders throughout the state. I do feel that we will get at least half of those students back. Our pattern of students choosing Parker School and Neshoba Tech is pretty similar to what we've seen over the last 10 years. It was plus or minus 2 or 3 students. So there wasn't an increase in the number of students choosing those 2 schools. I mean, some parents obviously would choose a private school or a parochial school for full in-person education as well, because it's very hard to find that in a public school this year, with the exception of a couple of grades that we've managed to do that with. So I'm optimistic, but I mean, we've had these conversations many times around the table. If our enrollment in kindergarten doesn't at least match our graduates, then we typically do see a bit of a slide in enrollment. We've been fortunate to keep our enrollment pretty stable over the years, but that was a result of being able to increase our student choice numbers in our district, and they do help out financially. A large portion of our revolving fund is a result of taking in school choice students. So without that money, we would be in a very different spot and having very different conversations than we currently have.
All right, thank you. Yes, who do you want to take a look at that next slide?
Sure. We've had some conversations about the population of students choosing hybrid and remote. I thought it was important, since we've been in school for 5 or so weeks, to finalize some numbers for you to look at. Very, very close to what we predicted as a district as a whole. There are fluctuations from school to school. No surprise that at our high school, 78% of our students are in the hybrid model. In our surveys, it was very clear that our parents really wanted their high school students in school as much as possible. And 19% of our students are remote. We have 15 students that are attending a full day I'll say that again, a 4-day program. There we go. Our middle school 64% of our students are hybrid, 30% are remote. We have 24 students that attend the 4-day program. Russell Street School, 61% chose hybrid, 34% chose remote, and we have 20 students that are attending the 4-day program. Shaker Lane is a little more complicated. 68% of our families chose hybrid for their students, 31% chose remote. And then we look at the 4-day program and broke it down. 6 students are in the 4-day program that's tied into the hybrid program. And then, as we all know, 29% of the students are full 4 days because of our full day preschool program and our K program and our transition program. So that makes it kind of unique. Again, I feel so good that we were able to offer full in-person programs for those grades. I mean, that certainly not only ties in with my own philosophical beliefs, but the research certainly supports the reality that the more in-person instruction we can have for students at that age, the better prepared they are in terms of developing a foundation, academic foundation to be successful. So again, it's not amazing, but certainly coincides with our survey results and all of the surveys we sent out. Questions about this chart?
I have one question. Do you know off the top of your head, Dr. Clench, or the other principals, when are we going to revisit the hybrid versus remote choices that the families made at each school?
It would be dependent on whether the school is a trimester or a quarter. So I'd have to ask the principals to give us some dates. But before you do that, a while ago, probably wasn't that long ago, it seems like a long time ago, we had picked review dates for reviewing our programs. Our first review date is coming up October 23rd. So we'll be spending some time reflecting and in terms of how well the hybrid and remote model is working in our schools.
And I would actually like to have the principals just remind us which marking term their schools are on, so we got a rough idea when that opportunity is. And also, if they've gotten any feedback from parents already that might give them an indication of if they think there's going to be any kind of shift in terms of these percentages.
Sure. Why don't we start with the high school?
Yeah, I can start. Thank you. Mike, I think we're looking at, when we look at the high school, our first term ends on November 20th, which sort of syncs up with, the introductory remarks you gave related to the MOA.
Mm-hmm.
That will be a clear, opportunity, turning point. I would say probably post the return after the holidays in January. Our term, we go all the way, first semester ends at the high school with all our semester courses. It would make sense for that. That's a natural turning point for families. February 1st would be roughly the start of the second semester at the high school. So I would think that would be a major point of decision for some families. We have had some families already ask us to go remote. And that's been, here and there over the last couple of weeks. Mm-hmm. And we've, obviously worked to accommodate that request.
Okay.
Yeah, at the middle school, we're on a trimester system. So I think our first trimester ends in the first week of December. We've had a couple of families choose remote for other reasons. We have had this anecdotal data. I don't have numbers, but a handful of families ask, based on the success that we've had at the middle school, if they can start sending their kids, into the hybrid model. It'll present some logistical questions that we'll have to answer as we move forward. But we are seeing some families who I think were, what it sounds like, waiting to see how everything went. Did it all work? Were we able to keep safe distancing? Were we able to provide a quality level of education? And I think because we've done that, I think we have a fair number of families who are feeling like they want to bring their kids back into the schools.
Okay.
And Russell Street.
For Russell Street, we're on a trimester as well. So I think families would be deciding around mid-December. To this point, I have had rave reviews about our fully remote classes, 6 of them. And I have only had one request from a family that's currently in a remote class for their student to be able to come in the hybrid model. And that's because their employment circumstance has changed since the beginning, but only one to this point.
Okay.
Baker Lane.
And we have 2 models. So we have in preschool and kindergarten, we run in a semester, and that semester model would be January 22nd, so the end of January to change. And same thing, similar to Russell Street, December 11th is the trimester for us. So I'm sure as a district, we'll start to talk about letters and notification and giving us advance notice so we can prepare for that switch.
Okay.
And in terms of switching learning models, in K to 5, it's a little different than 6 to 12. We have to be cautious if people are choosing hybrid, because we have hybrid assigned teachers and we want to make sure those classes are balanced. So if we do have people choosing to go hybrid from remote, we're going to have to most likely have them stay within the hybrid classroom, but just be remote full time. If we look at hybrid going to remote, we have to remember that we're maintaining 6 feet of distance for students more correctly. And we're pretty close to being capped in all of our classrooms, in all of our schools. So that transition would not be as easy unless the health metrics and the protocols warranted decreasing that distance for students. In our high school, going from remote to hybrid is a little easier because we don't have teachers that are assigned strictly to remote teaching.
Okay.
All of the students are in one cohort.
It sounds like we have plenty of time to continue to monitor it and see, and plenty of time for, as Michelle indicated, to communicate with families and make sure if we can do it, how we're going to be able to do it. Brad, you got some thoughts?
Yeah, well, I just have a question for Kelly. You mentioned that on October 23rd, that's going to be basically a day of reflection, a day of like routines to come together. So can you tell us more about what you're thinking that will happen then? Is this just a check-in, best practices? Is it professional development?
Well, we're gonna do both. In the morning, we have a session for all staff on trauma based instruction, or trauma informed instruction, and then part of the morning and the rest of the afternoon will be spent in grade level meetings or department meetings, doing a structured reflection in terms of how things are working in both of the models. And also looking at ways in which they can continue to work together to enhance opportunities for students within those 2 learning modes. We are starting to prepare a survey that we'll be sending out to families and staff in middle school, high school students as well. We're also going to blend some other survey questions into that. We're using Panorama this year. So we're going to take a look at social and emotional learning as well when we finish designing that survey.
Great, thank you. That was part of my question, is are you going to seek family feedback as well to inform your discussions? So that's great. Thank you.
All right. Any other comments, questions on the enrollment? Hybrid versus remote?
Mike, I wouldn't mind backtracking just for a second to the first chart. I guess it's really important for you to understand that in preschool, we have some students when they turn 3 years old come into our preschool program if they need some specialized programming. And that's happened recently where increasing our preschool enrollment by 3 students in the next 2 weeks. So like all enrollment in classes, there's a bit of fluidity to it. There's people exiting and people entering every week, every month. So it's not static.
Right. Okay. All right. Next on the agenda is our health metrics update. And Dorothy, you can bring that up.
Mhm.
I got a little more to talk about, unfortunately. You can see the first couple slides are typically reminding people of how we break it out into Littleton, and then the surrounding communities are moving out in concentric circles, and then including Middlesex County and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And you can see the visual representation of how that works. And then just a reminder that the data sources come right from the state, and how we do some of the calculations based on per 100,000. But we can see here when we look at the first set of data that Littleton is increasing again, and we are now in the red with 8.1 average daily cases per 100,000 people. So we don't have 8 cases per day in Littleton, but when we average it out over 100,000 people, we are over 8 on that metric, which puts us in the red. The border communities, which had been green, as well as the contiguous communities, have moved into yellow, and Route 495, Middlesex County, and the state have all trended up into the red. And we can see, representing that visually, you can see in the graph that there has been a trend since the middle of September, where all the different groupings are trending upward, with Littleton moving up as fast as Middlesex County and the state and the Route 495 belt, and then our border and contiguous communities are moving up a little more slowly, but all trending upward in terms of average daily cases per 100,000. We go to the next slide. We'll talk about test positivity using, again, the data from the weekly download. The goal is to stay below 3%, and recommended that we stay below 1% for maintenance. And again, the trends are higher. If we go to the next slide, it's not as dramatic an increase as it is in total cases, but you can see here that Littleton is over 1.4. The border communities are still slightly under 1%, but everybody else is over 1%. Middlesex County slightly under, and then the state, they're all trending higher, except for the border communities are fairly stable. So that reflects what's happening, just on a little less dramatic note. And again, you can see this represented. Everybody is going upward over the last few weeks, just not as dramatic a trend as we saw in the average cases per day. If we go to the next slide, just kind of a summary that, we are in the red. We've had 11 cases in the last 14 days. When we push that up to per 100,000, that gets us to 8.1 daily cases per day per 100,000 people. The border and surrounding communities are yellow, but they had been green, so they are trending higher. And then the 495 belt, Middlesex County, and the state are red. Again, they were yellow last week, so everybody is trending higher. So that is concerning and problematic. However, one thing we do want to know is, how do we assess the fact that we're in the red relative to what it might mean for how we conduct school? And just a reminder, this is from DESE guidance. This is taken directly from their guidance. There is no one threshold or metric that indicates a school or district should suspend in-person learning. And it's important to note that these decisions are made based on the local context, and we're collaborating with DESE and the local Board of Health. And the things that we're looking at is, if we're red for a sustained period of time over multiple weeks, then that would be a time when we would start to think about whether or not we need to transition into a remote model, or if test results suggest widespread transmission is occurring. Obviously, ours is going up, but talking to the Board of Health, they've indicated that they think it's pockets in the community that have not directly affected students or staff to this point. If there are widespread absences among students and staff due to illness, that would be something we would be worried about. At this point, we do not see that trend occurring. And then there's other, local factors that are important to consider, and we will continue to monitor this as we, see how it works. Some other communities around us had been red, went back to yellow, so it's entirely possible that could happen. The other thing to note, everybody received notice, the students, the families and the staff today. We did have our first positive case for a student in Littleton. However, that student is a fully remote student. It wasn't someone that was in the buildings or classrooms, but the notification went out to families and staff that we had identified that first case. That just happened today. Previous today, we had no confirmed cases among students or staff, and we still have no confirmed cases among students and staff that are attending our building, either learning or teaching in our buildings in the hybrid model. At this point, we have invited Katrina Wilcox-Hagberg to present some slides related to this. Katrina has been helping us out with this information for a while now, but she's also now a member of the COVID Action Task Force, which is a group put together by the Board of Health to focus on metrics and how to deal with COVID and education and outreach and contact tracing. They did a presentation at the Board of Health meeting last night that I attended. Very informative. They've been working very, very hard. They've got some great ideas and some really, really good information. So at this point, we asked Katrina to kind of come in tonight and go over the same slides she presented last night, because I think it helps inform us, especially now that we've gone into the red for the first time. So Katrina, Dorothy, did you get her with us?
Yes, she's here.
All right.
You can hear me?
Yep.
All right. Hi, everyone. So thank you for the introduction, Mike. So one of the priorities of our COVID advisory team that the Board of Health put together is to help educate people in our community about ways to reduce the risk of COVID transmission and understanding the data. One thing's been very clear sitting and listening to all these school committee meetings is that we're all concerned about a cluster event happening in our schools. And there's good reason for that. Schools are a place where lots of people gather for hours on end inside. So those are all riskier environments. And there's many things that the school has done to reduce the risk for in-person learning, which is great. But it's still good to understand the data and the literature and see where we can make improvements. And for months now, actually well before DESE even came out with their guidelines, I've been trying to understand the literature about school outbreaks here in the US and across the world, any place that's reopened after lockdowns. And what's really my main takeaway from that research is that COVID cases reported in school settings are really highly correlated to the higher rates circulating in the community. So that is the more people who have COVID, the higher our rate of 8.1 per 100,000 people, the more likely we are to find cases in school settings because we're looking there. So this pie chart, I just want to go over this slide now. So DESE started publishing the number of cases reported by school districts every Thursday. There was a new report I noticed published this afternoon, but I didn't have time to update the slides and do this number crunch. So these pie charts are based off of the data that was published last week on October 7th. And I realized when I saw this data that we could take these reported cases by school district and then compare it to the rates that rates for each town published by the Mass Department of Public Health. And this would give us a good idea of the relationship between the community spread and the cases in schools. So I laid this slide out to try to show the progression of progression of risk, so that the upper left-hand corner is the lowest risk communities, those green communities. And if you go across the top, it gets a little hotter and a little hotter until you're at the bottom right-hand corner, and those are the high-risk communities who are red.
Karina, I'm sorry to interrupt. This is Brad. It's tough for some of us to see. I imagine it's tough for people to see at home. Can you tell us what the different color codes mean?
Of course, yes.
In the chart? Thank you.
Great. It went away. Okay.
So the blue, the good thing is the major color, the blue, is no cases. So the highest proportion for each of these is that no cases have been reported. And then the green is 1 case. The yellow is 2 cases. Like the light orange is 3 cases. The brighter orange is 4 cases, and the red is 5 or more cases reported.
And these are cases reported in the school systems themselves?
Reported by the school
Okay.
districts. Yeah.
Thank you.
And then, so as you can see, it's like a heat map, so that the more red you get, the more cases are being found in the schools, but the more cases are actually being found in schools who are in communities who are red. So they have higher rates of transmission in their community. So thinking of this with just the enrollment numbers that Dr. Clenchey just presented, if I did my rough calculation right, our rate of 8.1 average daily cases in Littleton in a population of 1,500 kids, and that's across both remote and hybrid, would be 1 to 2 cases. We would expect to find 1 to 2 cases in this population of students. So we just had one in the remote setting today. So I guess we are on target, if you want to say it that way. So the higher the rates in our community, the more likely we're going to find cases in our school system, and then a cluster event might actually happen. So it's important to keep these rates, to keep control of these rates, to do everything we can to keep them down and as low as possible. And that onus is actually on the responsibility of everybody, not just the schools, because a lot of transmission happens outside of schools. So can you flip the slide, please? With the next slide, is that possible?
Mhm.
It's stuck.
Working.
I know. Thank you, Dorothy.
You're welcome.
Okay, so the other thing that the Mass DPH publishes every week is rates by age group. So case rates for each age group. And other than 0 to 19-year-olds in a 20-year block, everyone else is in a 10-year block or so. And as you can see, these rates have been trending higher in all age groups, and they're pretty parallel. So the rates are highest among people 20 to 50. Those are the first 4 lines. 20 to 59. And then the one limitation of this data, and I keep wanting to ask them to fix this, is that the 0 to 19 age bracket is really wide. And I'm given socialization habits and development, and what we know from other research, that an older kid, let's say 10 to 19, is going to look much closer to a 20 to 29-year-old than a kid who's a toddler and at home, and their risk profile doesn't look the same. So it's something to keep in mind, that that's a blended group. And that we might need to think about our middle schoolers and our high schoolers a little different in how we handle their risk and their risk calculation, if you will. So then there are also 2 vertical lines that I included on this chart, and they roughly correlate to when colleges opened near the beginning of September, and then also September 16th, which was the first day of school for most schools in Massachusetts, and also when the state relaxed some of the reopening guidelines. So as you can see, following these 2 openings, people were mixing more. They were more mobile. They were hanging out with more people or coming into contact with more people. And as a result, as predicted by every public health expert I've been learning from, rates are trending higher for all of these age groups. And the more we mix, the more our rates are going to rise. Can I have the next slide, please? All right, so I just went over the first 2 bullets on this slide pretty quick, so we won't rehash that. But the third slide I think is really important. So at one of Governor Baker's recent press conferences, he indicated that the contact tracing efforts and the information that they are learning out of that effort has indicated that non-masked social gatherings and pre or asymptomatic household transmissions are what's driving the current increases we're seeing across the state. And this age data, the ones that graph I just showed, actually supports this, because the rates are actually increasing for all age groups pretty uniformly. So let me repeat this. The risk of COVID transmission is highest among people we're the most comfortable with. And the more we mix, sorry, let me rephrase that. So the rates are going to rise across all age groups just because our social and our patterns of mixing across society has changed. And we are less likely to use the careful controls that we've put in place with like schools with masks and distancing and less density, good ventilation when we are hanging out with the people we are most comfortable with. So I think that's why we're seeing the patterns suggest that these unmasked social gatherings and the people we live in the same house with are where the spread is happening. Now, the next slide, please. So what can we do about it? SARS-CoV-2 is an opportunist. It strikes when we let our guard down. Just like I said, the people we're most comfortable with are the ones we're most likely to get transmission from. I really like this Swiss cheese image. It's a model that's been used in many industries apparently and recently adopted by epidemiologists because it shows that multiple layers of protections are needed and that together they reduce the risk of transmission. So no one layer is perfect. We wish we had that magic silver bullet, but it doesn't exist. So what we need to do is layer up to improve our success in reducing transmission. So as we've talked about, the schools have put a number of these layers into use already. They've reduced density with hybrid learning and reducing the number of kids in the building. We're checking on the ventilation, opening windows, requiring masks at all times, improving hand hygiene and surface cleaning. All those things help layer things together to reduce this transmission as much as we can. But here's the kicker. I just told you that the current rates are being driven by unmasked social gatherings. And I also told you that community rates matter in preventing cases in our schools. So what we really need to do as individuals, we need to also use as many of these layers as possible when we're on our own and hanging out with our own friends, because that's where transmission is happening. So if you're hanging out with your friend in your backyard, you can both lower your risk if you wear a mask, even if you're outside. I kind of like to think of it as a COVID budget. So if you're doing a couple of things in person, perhaps it's wise to save in other areas by not participating. So don't go to a large gathering, but maybe gather with a few people with masks in a backyard. And I think we as parents really need to model these good risk reduction behaviors to our kids and help our kids learn to embrace them and why they're important. I mean, we're in this for the long haul. It's not next month it'll be over. I wish it was, but I think we're going to see these that we're going to need to use these behaviors even once a vaccine is available, because there'll be a period of time there's not enough vaccine to cover everyone and to really reduce the risk of transmission. So until then, we need to prevent shutdowns. And one way to do that is to keep practicing good behaviors when we're on our own. So the other thing I want to touch on is that I also mentioned that pre and asymptomatic spread among members of the same household has been shown to drive up the rates recently. And that's because COVID's primary mode of transmission is through the air. And we share that same air with family members who live under the same roof. So I admit it's unlikely that we're going to distance from our kids or wear a mask inside our house at all times, but that doesn't mean that we're out of options. We could do what we can do to improve ventilation, like crack a window, let the fresh air in, even during the winter. Can't hurt to do a couple times a day. And if you but I think importantly, if you discover that someone in your household has been exposed, the state guidelines currently say that you need to quarantine and seek testing, but your family members can go about their lives. And I think the research that those guidelines were based on have been recently updated. The science we know more, so maybe we should hopefully do better. And the guidelines haven't been changed yet. So to be safer, due to that airborne transmission and asymptomatic spread, I think if you could assume everyone in your household has also then been exposed until you're tested and no more, that would be a safer thing to do if you're able to. So, for example, if I found out I'm exposed, then my entire family would have to, I would try to quarantine my entire family if possible until we can get tested. And I would also have my kids switch to remote learning until I know that we're in the clear. And that protects not only those around me, the ones I love, my family, whatever, but it also protects the school community. So I also totally understand that may not be possible for everyone. So it's still important just to do the best you can. And so just to summarize, I just want to make sure everyone is clear that using as many of these layers as possible, whenever you're possible, even at home, is really important. And I'm not saying don't gather with people, but maybe think about ways to gather safer. Throwing a mask on when you're hanging out in the backyard around a fire pit isn't the hardest thing to do. And I've watched my kids be able to embrace that and thrive in it as if it's normal. It's kind of amazing. So I know we've been reassessing where we can do better whenever we can, and I hope others will join me with that. So, and the goal being to keep our schools open for in-person learning as long as we can, if we can work together and looking for ways to improve. So I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Katrina. Anybody from the school committee, any questions or comments on what Katrina brought forward tonight?
Sure, I have a question.
Justin, go ahead.
Yeah. Katrina, thanks very much. Very informative. And I think you did a better job than Mike typically does going through that information.
He's caught on pretty quickly.
I got to get some new material. That's my problem.
We're going to draw a circle.
Yeah.
So my question was, since you're a resident expert here, it would make sense to me that the more cases we have in town, the more likely that a case would all of a sudden appear in the school system.
Yes.
But is there any data out there that suggests that that there's community spread within the school systems, or to those that have reopened, including Littleton, does it seem like the Swiss cheese method of all the safety protocols that are taking place in the schools would in fact help prevent a community spread event? Because no doubt the numbers are going to likely increase, and no doubt a couple of cases are probably going to pop up in school, but we can't prevent that because you don't catch COVID from the building. You catch COVID from other people within sharing that airspace. So I wanted your opinion as to, do you think that all of the Swiss cheese method that's taking place in the school building, if that's adequate? I hope that it is. And if you've seen anything where it appears that even though we've got high-risk communities and cases popping up, are there instances where there's community spread taking place in the school systems, or does it seem that that's not a place where it's typically happening?
That's a really great question. I wish I had all the details on every case that's arisen. I know last night that there was reported at the Board of Health meeting that some of the cases in Littleton actually came out of a group resident setting.
Right.
And so I do think what you're trying to do by putting all these layers in place with the schools is to prevent that cluster from happening. And it should help. But again, like clusters, these kids congregate in school, they kind of like cluster together. They also cluster together outside of school. So it's going to be really hard to say it was the school that caused it. It's probably socialization, and those patterns are present both inside and outside of school. So the hope is that with all of everything that you guys have put in place to keep our schools as safe as possible, all those layers will just prevent a cluster from forming inside the school. And then it is important to keep those clusters from not being caught and kind of festering, because kids can transmit to adults, and then those adults can transmit to the next person. So this is, it's really, I think the layers you guys have put in place are what we know works right now. And so it's great that you've adopted them all. The governor did say that it's not schools that are like these big out clusters aren't happening in schools right now. And we hope that stays true. So I think we'll have to keep looking at the data to see that.
Okay. And then I think it might have been you that said this, somebody, it's real easy for the needle to move a lot in Littleton because we don't have a lot of people. Yeah. So we can go above and below threshold pretty quickly. But one of the advantages to being a small community is we can actually investigate the actual cases and not have to rely upon trends. So do you think that will necessarily continue to be true, that we will potentially gain access or better access to where the cases are coming from? And if it happens to be one or two families and they're spread within the household, it's not necessarily a concern for the school system.
Yeah, that's exactly the kind of like case narrative, like those kind of qualitative narrative, those kind of stories matter in the kind of work I do. So every time we talk to the Board of Health and we ask them to like try to get some information out of Jim Graffi. Like that's the kind of stuff that matters, to have you guys stay very connected to the Board of Health and to everyone to have their thumb on the details. Like we all have to be a little investigators right now. So if a family, like I said, if like one kid is sick, maybe we can convince, like the thing to prevent it from spreading is to keep everyone in the family out of the public eye and out of the schools. So while the current state guidelines don't require that, it would be great to, if we can work on our community embracing the trying to do the right thing so we can protect our community more. But I do think we have seen, as Mike pointed out, some towns blick them to the red and then they come back down to yellow. And if you look at each of the towns around us that we use to do the border and the surrounding communities, they've all kind of oscillated a little bit. And that's part of the reason why we look at a broader population for Littleton, is because we need to expand our denominator, basically. And that gives us a little bit a more steady trend to like keep an eye on. So I think our true rate is probably going to lie between was it 4.9 and 8.1. So we're still, if we're lucky, this one little cluster will be contained and we'll come back down to yellow. We do have to say that as rates rise across the state, and things are going to get harder to come back down. So the more spread that's happening, the higher the rates are going all around us. It's just going to be hard to like have that one case isolated and put aside in 2 weeks, So I think effort on everyone's part, not only the school committee and the Board of Health, and it's really parents, it's really the kids. Like we've got to pull in the same direction in order to keep our schools open as long as we can. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Anyone else? Brad, yeah, go ahead.
Just once again, want to thank Katrina for this. It's incredibly helpful. And I really appreciate you taking the time to do it.
All right. Excellent. Katrina, thank you very much. I'm sure we're going to hear from you again, whether it's in this forum or through the Board of Health and the CAT work. We'll work to integrate that as much as possible. I appreciate the comments you made about people making their decisions in terms of how it's going to affect everyone, and specifically how it's going to affect our ability to keep our schools open for in-person instruction. We talked a little bit about that at our last meeting because we had a party that had led to concern, and we know in other communities that large social gatherings by students, high school age students primarily, caused schools and districts to have to close their buildings for at least a period of time, and it could otherwise have been avoided if people had been making better decisions. The decisions people are making are not going to affect solely their outcomes. They're going to affect other people's outcomes, people they might not even realize or know. And I think that it would help if, as a community and as a school committee and as a COVID action task force and a Board of Health, any messaging that we can do to help people understand how to make better decisions, and not just what you can't do, but what you can do, what is good decision making and what is allowed and healthy and beneficial to you socially, but still protects us and our ability to keep our schools open, I think is important. The nice thing about it is, as Justin indicated, we're small, so we move a lot, but we can also help each other out. It's fairly easy to do. So anything we can do together in that regard, I think is the important thing, and will help us maybe be able to beat the curve that other communities face when we see the overall trends of the state going up. We may be able to stay underneath that radar longer than other communities if we all work together to do that, and that should be the goal. And there's people, the example you gave was if someone in your house thinks they might have got it, then assume everybody got it. Go remote for a few days until you can quantify that and know safely that things are good, instead of taking the more liberal decision of, well, I'm pretty sure my kids don't have it, I'm just going to send them to school again today. That's not the way to think about it. It's really conservative decision making will help us all out. And if that means that individual families have to go through some tough days or tougher days than they would otherwise have wanted to. They need to think about that and how that can benefit the rest of us. So I think we need to keep harping on that. This is the second week in a row. We've kind of talked about it. And I think if we continue to push each other, I think we'll benefit from it as much as we can. So again, thank you for that. I appreciate it. And I'm sure we'll talk to you again. All right, next we've got our second section in the meeting for public input. Is there anyone who would like to speak before the school committee? Just use the raise your hand function. I see at least one hand up, Dorothy.
Yes, I've got it. Amy Tez, your name, your street, and your question, please.
Hi, this is Amy Tez, 117 Whitcomb Ave. I just wanted to, I know that you've all received my, Greg and my letter this week. I wanted to just pick up from where you were talking with Katrina about encouraging people in the community to employ some efforts to maintain social distancing and quarantining if necessary. But I'm wondering if the school committee would consider changing the protocol to make that more of a guideline directed by the schools to ensure that we're doing all that we can, and then increase notification to the class, the whole class or the whole school, so that people at home can make an informed decision. I'm just wondering what people's thoughts about that are.
Yeah, Amy, we did get that letter. Thank you. Dr. Clenchey indicated in his response to you that we were CC'd on that they are definitely going to take a look at that. I think the fact that we had one case that was in a remote learner, and the fact that the notification went out to staff and families that same day, I think gives a strong indication of how we think we need to respond when something like that happens. In terms of, particular cases where it's something that's happening at the house, at a particular home, and is not related directly to school, that can be more difficult for us to be able to dictate the terms of. But the general themes that we talked about tonight about people thinking about that and the education that we can do as a school committee and a board of health, I think are important. But we will definitely have the administration take a look at the suggestions that you made in the letter that you sent to us and see what we think is actionable.
We appreciate that. I think, from our perspective, we're just hoping that we can, I think having pretty clear guidelines based on current data is really important, and knowing that the 6 foot, 15-minute rule may not be as accurate to our current present time point as it was maybe a few months ago. So we really appreciate you guys considering it, and, obviously, are hopeful that everybody gets to stay in school and continue to participate for as long as possible.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I don't see any more hands. Chairman
Okay.
Fontanella, not tonight.
All
Not
right,
anymore.
thank you. All right, we'll go into subcommittee updates. Before we go into the three big ones, Brad, you had a CPAC meeting or meetings that you wanted to give us an update on?
I did, Mike. So I'm very excited to announce that we had a CPAC kind of organizational meeting. I guess it was yesterday, right, Lynn? Yesterday, and it was. We had to change the date within the week before. It was 5 o'clock. It was horrible timing. We still had 17, I think, parents who were able to attend and start the important work of CPAC, or restart it. We made some organizational process, so we have a lot of parent volunteers who are forming an interim team to work on bylaws and things like that. We also are starting the process of identifying school liaisons. So there will be parent contacts at each of the schools. We already have a couple people for, I think, Russell Street and Shaker Lane who volunteered. If there are parents out there who'd like to maybe be a liaison, it's not a lot of work and be really helpful to parents who are just starting this process at the middle school or high school. We can help you figure out how that might work, and starting the process of parents with kids with special needs supporting each other. And so I'm really optimistic about this. We set another date for the next meeting, so I want to go ahead and announce that now. We'll communicate that in a lot of different ways, but that's going to be Tuesday, September 10th. I believe at 7 o'clock at night. It'll be a virtual meeting. I think Google Meets that Lynn will set up and distribute the link to. But I think this is a really positive development for the district, and there was a lot of energy in the meeting yesterday. So I just wanted to thank all the parents involved.
All right.
All right, do you want to just give us that date again?
I do, Justin. The date is Tuesday, November 10th.
Thank you.
The time is 7 o'clock Eastern.
Okay. Sounded like September something the first time you said it. So
I probably said it. Yeah. Thanks.
I just wanted to clarify. Yeah.
I can't do math, as Mike said, and I can't read a calendar.
We'll get that information out.
Yeah.
As we get closer to. So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
All right. PMBC, Timlin, do we have any updates on that?
No updates. I mean, we are having meetings, but they're mostly about the library and police station.
Okay, thank you. About the budget subcommittee?
Matt, do you want?
Yeah, nothing currently. We should be starting that process soon.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And policy subcommittee?
We haven't had a
Report.
meeting yet.
Yep.
Okay, all right, that's fine. I would like to remind everyone, we just found out today that town meeting, the special fall town meeting, which was supposed to be Saturday, it's going to be a crummy rainy day Saturday, but I heard the weatherman tell us Sunday is going to be beautiful. So we're going to do town meeting at Alumni Field outdoors. We did it last spring, worked out very well. We'll try it again this Sunday. So if you can get to town meeting, we would appreciate it. Any other business before the school committee? All right, hearing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second?
Motion made and seconded. I'll take a roll call vote. Matt?
Matt Hunt, yes.
Justin?
Justin McCarthy, yes.
Timlin?
Timlin Rossius, yes.
Brad?
Brad Austin, yes.
And Mike Fontanella says yes as well. All right, thank you, everyone. Thank you, LCTV, Judy and Dave, and Dorothy and Bettina. Thank you for supporting the meeting. We will see you guys soon. Thank you.
Thank you.